I also wanted to ask, kind of as a just continuing on with your story here, now that you've gotten away from being KJV only, how that has impacted your life. I know that it can be hard, but there can also be blessings as well when we grow in our understanding. So it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to hear a little bit about that.
How has it impacted me? So yeah, a lot, greatly. It's impacted my entire life. I'll kind of give the second part of my story now, and it starts off a little discouraging, but it gets very encouraging towards the end. So when I came to my position on realizing the Bible does not teach a King James only translation position, and realizing the benefit of using modern translations with these people I was working with, I then looked at my daughter, who was 3 years old at the time, and I'm realizing I want my daughter to hear God speak the way that she speaks. I want my daughter not to think that God is speaking in this older language that is the holy language we need to talk about God in. And it really hit me, like, I want my daughter to hear God clearly above what tradition might say. I respect people that say, well, I like the beauty of the King James and I like the history of it. Me too. And I'll probably teach my daughter to memorize Psalm 23 in the King James. I'll probably teach her to memorize the Lord's Prayer in the King James. I mean, they're beautiful passages. But by and large, understandability is more important to me than cultural beauty. God speaking and knowing this is what God said, and I understand every word in here of what he's saying. And if I need to look it up, I don't have to go to a Webster's 1828 dictionary. I can go to a modern Oxford English dictionary and look up the word. That
Yeah.
was more important to me. And when I hit that, I realized I'm kind of in some trouble here because I just got ordained. I did not
Mm.
affirm that I was King James only at my ordination. I didn't. I made a clear point. I remember talking with my pastor before the ordination, saying that I was not going to affirm King James only. I'm just going to say I believe it's the best translation. And I was very upfront. I've not been unethical in any of this.
Mm.
And then after my ordination, it's the summer months. I realized I have to be ethical and let my pastor know, this is where I'm at. I have a new position on this. So what I did was I took the preface to the King James translation and I ended up expositing 10 theses about what the King James translators believed. That eventually became my book. I
Mm.
did not write this book on purpose. It came accidentally. It came from
Mm.
knowing I had to defend my position. And I was using this because all through Bible college and hearing this, they say the King James translators were the smartest men. No one could ever be smart enough. They want to use them. And now I have people going, oh, Josh, he thinks the translators were inspired. And I'm like, wait a second. You guys, like, you go,
Mm.
you're like, they're the smartest guys. And then when I say, hey, read what they said, well, they were sinful men too, and I realized I had to use this as my middle ground to show I was not just reading the wrong people. Like I said, I've been accused of, Josh, you're reading too many people and they're swaying you. And I would say the exact opposite. I read both sides and said, God, show me which side is true. And I was still stuck. On one side, Mark Ward and, D.A. Carson, the non KJV only people. I read their books and they made some convincing arguments. But then I also read the other side. I read David Sorensen. I read David Cloud. I read Sam Gipp and, Gail Riplinger. They're kind of the more crazier end of things there. And I was like, they make some points too. And I was stuck in the middle. And it was literally this preface that broke me when I
Mm.
realized, wait a second, even the King James translators were not King James only. So I put this document together. I met with my pastor, and you have to understand at that time, I had just transitioned off of staff, but I was still the youth leader. I still taught the teen Sunday school. If there were youth rallies and trips, I would still take the teens to that, and I love doing that. I songs. I was very active in my church. So I realized for me to espouse these views would have ramifications. I wasn't dumb. I knew I couldn't just put my pastor in a hard spot. And I realized that. So I went to him and was very open and let him know of my views. And through many meetings over many weeks, even a few months, it came to the point that it was made known very clear I could not stay at the church in my teaching position whatsoever, in any leadership position, if I wasn't King James only. And I made the appeal, and I didn't want to leave. I was not trying to be this person causing division. I wanted to stay. And I even said, I will stay, and I will always preach out of the King James. I will always teach out of the King James. In fact, I won't even reference other translations when I preach and teach. But on my own, with my family and with people I disciple and with refugees I'm working with, my conscience compels me to use modern translations. I would be sinning against God to not do so. I made that appeal thinking, well, maybe this could work. It couldn't. I had to be King James only all the way through, or it wouldn't work. And I won't lie, there was a part of me that wanted to fight and say, well, I'm going to push this. This isn't biblical. I mean, this is a sole individual liberty decision. I'm not sinning. I should be able to stay here and do this. But then I realized, I'm looking at my former pastor, and I'm like, I love this guy. I have nothing against him. And I understand how he's thinking. I know how he thinks. I know his positions. And I look at the people of the church and I go, I understand where they're at. And I realize I would cause more division to that part of the body of Christ by trying to have a scorched earth battle for what I believe is true. And I realized it would be more wise of me to choose to leave than to stay and fight it out. And it's even hard to get those words out of my mouth and say choose to leave, because it was kind of like, you can't teach here, so what are you going to do? And I'm realizing, well, I'm going to choose to leave because that would help the most people out. And my wife and I had to move on. We left the church. Thankfully, we've still kept some good relationships with many people in the church. I've even been back to visit for certain conferences and meetings, because I told my former pastor and even, my brothers and sisters there, I don't want to divide from you. And if I could, I would stay. I want you to see that even though I have to move on, I love you, I respect you. And even if we differ on the Bible translation issue, the gospel is above that. And we cannot put this at the gospel. It is not. Because go to 1610 and there is no King James Bible. It can't be a gospel issue. I look at this and I realize this is where true Christian love is displayed, is not when you agree with someone, but it's when you disagree. And the passage that Jesus says has really stuck out to me. It's been a guiding verse in John when he says, by this will all men know that you're my disciples. And he doesn't say if you use the same English Bible translation. He says if you love one another. And love is not just loving someone when it's all good. It's when it's difficult. That's where love is proved. Jesus proved his love for me when my sin put him to the cross. It wasn't easy there. He showed his love towards me. So my duty as a Christian is to show love towards my King James only brothers. And my goal in my book and how I interact online is never to be malicious, never to say these idiots, these morons, because they're not. A lot of them are very smart people, and they're my brothers and sisters in Christ that I will sit around the feet of Jesus for eternity going, isn't Jesus so much greater than a translation in a particular language that we had at one point of history? So that was the hard point of how it impacted me. The positive side is, how has it impacted me? Amazingly. I have a bachelor's degree in theology, and I understand the Bible better now than even when I was in Bible college. I read and I compare translations, and I go to the Greek and the Hebrew, and I look at it, and I'm realizing there's this freedom of understanding the Bible clearly. And my wife, I love it because I've seen the freedom in her eyes. She was very apprehensive at first when I started talking about these things. And I told her, I said, Laura, you do not have to believe this if you don't believe it. I can't tell you to believe what I believe, but this is what I'm studying and I'm coming to this. And what's amazing is when I gave her the grace to look at it on her own, God brought her to this understanding too. And I remember the first time my wife read through the book of Hosea in a modern translation, she got done with it and said, I have never understood that book my entire life. Like, it never made sense. And she read it in a modern translation. She goes, that's amazing. Like, the whole book's about the gospel, and he's, his wife does this and he buys her back. And I understood the narrative as I was reading it. And I look at that and I'm like, how beautiful that God's allowing us to take advantage of modern English, modern language, and understand his word better. And as I teach my kids memory verses, as I tell them Bible stories at night, I'm realizing it's not getting the words in just the right order and then God will speak to them. It's making sure they know what the message of God says, and words are how we communicate that. So The negative, we had to leave a church. It was hard. There's even still struggles we deal with, on a semi-regular basis of, different relationships that are strained. But as a whole, those will work out over time. And I am every day always privileged and loving being able to read the Bible in modern English. And it's absolutely amazing.